If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Angus Mugford, a seasoned performance leader with over 2 decades of experience shaping elite teams across professional sports. From the Toronto Blue Jays to the New Jersey Devils, and now as Managing Director for Performance and Operations at USTA. Angus has helped build high-performance systems from the inside out. In this episode, we explore what it takes to lead and perform at the highest level without burning out. Angus shares insights on the power of self-awareness, the importance of daily routines, and how to set goals that are both ambitious and within your control. If you're navigating leadership pressure or just want to show up as your best self, this conversation is worth your time. Let's dive in. Today, it's my honor to welcome my friend, Dr. Angus Mugford. Angus and I have known each other, since 2015 when you came up to the Blue Jays, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we've shared experiences in various pro sports. And it's such a pleasure to have you on today, Angus, to talk about mental performance.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. I'm really glad to spend some time and talk shop.
Me too. We don't get to do it often enough. So this is a great excuse for us to get together as well. Angus, I'd really like to get started with drawing the parallels here. The reason we built Vitality Collective was really to highlight and to bring these lessons that we work with elite athletes and bring them out into the real world. The way I see it is that it's just a human, right? And all human systems are the same. The physical performance continuum is the same. And I believe that the mental health and mental performance continuum is the same. Where we apply that continuum, I think, is what is different. You know, are we at home? Are we dealing with family and kids and regular everyday stresses? Or are we on the ice for an NHL game? You know, we're at game 7 of the playoffs. It's the same continuum for me. And so I'd love to get your take on how you've seen mental health and performance through your career.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so exciting seeing you on this journey. And I was just talking to a colleague of mine who works in the mental performance space and just became a new parent, for the first time. And I was telling him, like, the surprise I had, the most challenging job in the world, I think, is probably being a parent. And but how much of the time of my life I've spent training and studying mental performance and well-being, it really applies to parenthood. In just the same way it might apply to, high performance in sport. And I think for my own career journey, I began, as a passionate kid and fan about sport and trying to fathom how, the underdog can possibly beat, the stronger, faster, better team. And this mental and emotional dimension that was really hard for people to articulate and put their finger on. That became my passion and pursuit. But the human factors, like you're describing, have allowed me to veer into these realms where I really don't know much about the sport. I mean, honestly, over the last 15 years, from working with special operations military units to Major League Baseball and ice hockey and the NHL. I knew nothing about those sports. When I did a keynote with the Sports Business Journal, they labeled me the reverse Ted Lasso, with this idea of being the Brit, on the front
Yeah.
line of American sports who,
Yeah.
I knew less about ice hockey than I did about baseball even.
Yeah.
But that didn't matter. There were plenty of experts in those industries.
Yeah.
And what they were wanting was actually someone to address and think about their sport from a different perspective and to bring in those human elements about how do we integrate all these different pieces together? How do we really put the player in the middle? And fundamentally, I think it's a lot about the psychology that
Right.
everybody is on a different journey, and how do you meet people where they're at and really understand their lens and help empower them to
Hmm.
be the best that they can be. And the parallels are context is always different,
Hmm.
but the universal principles and factors underlying that are very, very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing because the parallels with our careers, I think, are quite remarkable there. I always joke that I haven't worked in a sport that I know anything about since like the early 2000s when I was in rugby. And since then I was the rugby guy, and then I was like the college guy, then I was the basketball guy. It's like my expertise was always one sport behind. Like I didn't know anything about basketball. Now all of a sudden I'm in hockey. I'm a basketball guy. Right?
I'm so grateful to be back in the world of tennis, where I do
Yeah.
have some of my origin
Yeah.
story at IMG Academy. But similarly, when I came into tennis, I was not the tennis guy. So,
Right.
and I don't think tennis view me as a tennis guy, but it is
Yeah.
familiar. It's a familiar environment, language, and game,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some people too. But you're so right, and I think it is one of the cool things for you and I that we were on the cutting edge of
Yeah.
the performance industry in pro sport here,
That's right.
and we could do a whole show or discussion about
Yeah.
that and the
Yeah.
journey. But I think it is one of the cool principles about people
Yeah.
and also change, and how people navigate new ways of working and thinking about sport and ourselves in a new
Yeah.
light, which I think for a lot of your audience, who are looking at themselves as performers, whether that's as
Hmm.
parents, executives, weekend warriors, or serious performers, athletes,
Yeah.
there's so much to be learned from exploring things with that kind of curiosity and lens.
And that's something I really want to just drill into real quick because I want people to realize that they are performers more than anything. There'll be a subset of people out there who are listening who absolutely view themselves as a performance. They're looking for every little edge. And then there'll be people listening because they want to just get healthier,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we approach longevity through vitality. And what that means is performance, right? As we ramp up all of these performance markers and we do what it takes to get ready for performance, all of the health stuff falls into place underneath. And that's such an important point that you raised, that we really do need to change how we're thinking. The brain is a part of the physical body. And people sort of talk about the brain and the body like they're different. Like it's all one thing. And when you show up, whether it's in the family environment, whether it's going into work, whether it's giving a presentation, you're preparing for performance. And your brain and your body can be trained to perform in its optimal state as you go onto that arena. So I think that's a really important parallel to draw.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges around that concept is that it's fairly abstract too. And I think it's something that is innate, as think of school, or we obviously prepare for exams or performances in that realm, but like we don't often think about mental preparation or mental skills as something concrete and that we dedicate time to. It's either we have it or we don't.
Yeah.
It's like intellect. It's just how you use your brain as opposed to something you can
Hmm.
improve, where we don't often think of the body that way. That
Yeah.
we think about going to the gym or, show me an athlete that thinks that they're strong enough. They're always going to be
Right.
working on things. And same things with skills. The tennis player who is, taking forehands, as part of their warm
Right.
up, like done a billion warm ups like that. But we
Right.
don't think of the brain in the same way, especially when we start to look at the amount of time we dedicate to, let's say maybe 5 hours a week at the gym or, taking
Right.
care of those things. But we wouldn't consider how many hours of mental training that we're doing any given week. And
Right.
so I think that paradox is something that when you create more awareness around performance and the factors that are driving success
Hmm.
or failure or mediocrity, then
Yeah.
it suddenly exposes this gap, which is pretty exciting. I think when people
Yeah.
realize there's this whole opportunity to really explore how to be better.
Yeah. I love that because, I'm going to be giving a talk next week on this exact topic. In sport, it's a little more intuitive. We eat, sleep, and train for this performance. And it's not like when you walk into the home and you lose it on the family that there's a crowd booing you, for your bad performance in that moment. So the feedback's not quite the same. But I really do believe that is an arena that you step into, high pressure, high stakes arena that you can prepare and train your body for. As I look at it, we talked earlier about these continuums. That this is how I've always seen sport, not in silos or human preparation. I see them on these continuums. We're just operating at different levels on the same continuum. We've got sort of mental health on one end of the continuum, and we've got mental performance on the other. And I've always seen those as inseparable. But I'd love to hear a definition of how are they different, these two terms at the different ends of the continuum.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think they're highly related. Um,
Hmm.
but I think the best way to describe it is actually by comparing it to the physical continuum,
Right.
of wellness and illness.
Hmm.
And I think that in a sporting context too, it's often the relationship between the work that an athletic trainer or physio might do on one end of that spectrum
Hmm.
through to the mental performance coach, mental skills coach. Well, one of our challenges in the industry around mental performance and mental health is language, and
Right.
also the degrees and licenses and certifications around the profession. But again, I think that's not dissimilar to, physical therapist versus an athletic
Yeah.
trainer versus a strength coach. I think probably most lay people would struggle to tell you which degrees or licenses or scopes of
Yeah.
practice they have.
Yeah.
But I think this idea of illness to wellness, like, and as you know, working with teams, it's not necessarily having the most highly skilled professional and expert
Hmm.
in any one of those pieces. To me, I think it's the relationship and collaboration between. So
Yeah.
think of the injured player, right, who may get surgery and is with a surgeon, and then is in a rehab protocol, working with physical therapists, building strength and functional movement, and then integrating more and more or closer to the field of play,
Yeah.
where they're then building on strengths and strong foundational movements that might be more their domain and expertise of the strength coach.
Hmm.
I think similarly, we see a relationship between mental health. It's just much harder to see and to measure,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a lot of where that gray area and complexity
Right.
can come. But and clearly, it's quite hard to compartmentalize performance if there's not a strong foundation of mental
Yeah.
health. Although you and I have
Yeah.
seen probably, athletes be successful on a world stage where they have a lot of dysfunction in their life,
Yeah.
but typically that's not sustainable.
Yeah. I think that lends itself to that comparison between the physical and the mental again.
Yeah.
We've seen people play their sport at high risk of injury and perform well, but until they don't.
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, it's always been about we have to have all of those layers. And what we're talking about is optimal performance. We're not talking about good enough. And this is a really big message with what we're trying to get through to these cognitive athletes that we work with now, whether it's executives or traders, whoever it might be. But I really do think that this applies all the way into the home. There's just such an important element of your mental health being the foundation of being able to go in and perform at your absolute best level. And we have taken it for granted that we just show up with what we show up with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we don't prepare for that. It's particularly in the real world. I think more in sport we're preparing mentally now. But outside of sport, this is the message that we must be able to see.
It's a great point. And obviously sport lends itself in a couple of ways, right? There's a lot of data around performance metrics, but there's also video, which coaches will point out. But also it's very easy. You can watch, how you did and do the gap analysis between what you felt and the thought versus what was the reality.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do that in typical life. People are not following me around with a camera and doing replays, when I screw something up or have a great moment. But that awareness raising is critical, right? Or even just reflecting on what is a good performance and what is not a good performance, and how are you judging? What are the criteria for that, so that you can better understand the mental elements? Because even like you said, with sport, you might have metrics around your performance, but that might be hiding the drivers to that performance. And so really trying to understand, what makes a good day, what makes a good meeting or presentation or interaction with somebody. And so there's almost like the homework or the setup of, before you get to the work, is really understanding, what is your performance and what are the key drivers that get you there.
So what are your foundational elements then? What would you say for people to be looking out for as these foundational elements of mental health and subsequently performance?
It's a great question. I think, even when constructing kind of draft profiles and communicating and thinking about broad concepts, I've typically thought about them as who are we as a person, as far as, and even in terms of person, it might be somewhat the personality traits that we have that are our kind of lens of the world. But some of that is also in terms of our behavioral risks, the things that we know are challenges or limitations, or when we're looking at a player of some kind of understanding them as a person. But I think two of the key areas that I have a lens and like to explore. One is as a competitor. Like, what kind of competitor are you? And there's a host of skills that could be learned or taught around, how we enter the arena, our concentration and attention, our confidence and self-taught, for example. But also the kinds of motivation that drive us to compete. That understanding is important. And the third one, which is my favorite in a lot of respects, is thinking about ourselves as learners. And, one of the key principles that really became crystal clear as I went to the Toronto Blue Jays under Mark Shapiro in particular is this idea that learning is our only sustainable competitive advantage. So understanding our capacity to learn and the drivers and things that help us learn is a super important aspect of what we do. And even think of it on a super simple level, taking the time to reflect each day, if that's just one thing, and taking that and thinking about how we apply that the next day, not just read a book, but actually kind of read ourselves and then think about, okay, so what adjustments do I want to make?
Yeah.
I find often the best players, the ones with the most sustainability, or the coaches I've learned so much from, humans I've learned so much from. They're typically very curious, very reflective, very thoughtful, but they're also willing to do the reps, right? That they have a high work ethic and really want to improve and get better. So for me, that person, competitor, learner are kind of the big buckets that I look to, both for myself and of others.
Yeah, and I want to touch on the confidence piece. And there's the traits that there are these people that seem to sort of have this magnetism that we look at. Maybe we know people in our lives that just look like they have it all together. They walk into a room, they're confident, and I saw that every day with the athletes walking, into the arena, going and walking onto the court.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also got to see the practice facility every day, and I got to see the locker room before games, and seeing the nerves and seeing how people had imposter syndrome, self-doubt, lack of confidence behind the curtain. Is confidence outside of sport something that you have or you don't, or do you feel that it's something that you can work on?
Well, I certainly feel it's something that you can work on. I think one of the interesting things I think about is confidence is actually a byproduct. So it is something that is it's tough when you don't have it. I think one of the interesting things about the environments that we've been in high performance sport is that people have got there, right? That they have had to go through different battles, defeats, challenges to get to that highest level. So they're also, even when there is self-doubt, they have a level of competence which they've demonstrated to be selected or to have. Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't, go away, but that competence is there, and I think that's one of the challenging things with false confidence. It's easy to, I know there's a lot of YouTube videos and advice, fake it till you make it and those kinds of things. And there are serious limitations to that. You can't just walk onto an NBA court and say, yeah, I'm going to dunk the ball. Like if you can't, like ball near the basket, there are parameters there. And I think pro sports are a good example of that, where, the minor league journey, you've lost many, many games, to get through to that point where you become a major league player. But there are a lot of drivers to confidence. And I think self-talk is one of the most powerful ones, where you can, as one of my old mentors said, you can talk yourself out of success, and people do all the time.
Yeah.
But, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, from how we set goals, to the preparation that we go through to be ready for a performance, our self-talk, our mental rehearsal. These are all tools that can help you improve not just your competence, but also, quiet your mind. I think a lot of times when we're at our most confident, we're actually, freeing ourselves from the negative self-talk and doubt and distraction in the moment when we need it the most. And that really is true for, I think, any presentation or other, non-athletic activity. Probably parenthood. I think of conversations and moments with my son, going face to face and challenging moments as a parent. All of those things, that self-talk and how we approach situations can massively influence the outcome.
Yeah, this is, I think, the thing that I've struggled with the most throughout my career, self-talk. It's been something that I recognize. I've worked with a therapist and a coach for 15 plus years now. And I recognized for me to level up, I had to get out of my way, essentially. And that self-talk was so negative, and there were consequences to mistakes, but internally. way more than externally. And that was paralyzing. And so even just catching, observing, catching, and quieting that, even having statements like, you don't get to talk to me like that anymore. Literally had to have that mantra to start with. Quiet that inner critic and create some separation where you're still there, but I sort of have a checks and balance now. I have a sort of higher self who gets to say, no, look, first of all, you've worked in high performance sport 20 years, right? You've done this before, you're prepared. And second of all, in this instance, you've done a lot of work to prepare to perform. And so that piece was so critical in my own development as a high performer to elevate my game, elevate my performance, and allow me to both reach higher levels, but also enjoy higher levels.
Yeah.
Right. My subjective experience of my jobs in sport changed as I changed that. And we would always tell the athletes, you earn your confidence to come into training camp. If you didn't work out all summer, you probably weren't going to be very confident when you showed up. Right?
Hey, kudos to you for acknowledging and attacking that too, because I think it's so easy that people never even take that step, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being self-aware and empowering yourself to do something about it. I think it's so huge. Yeah. And can improve with time and work, right? Like it's amazing that we can get into these bad habits. And to your point about high performance, I think we often, perfectionism is, it's an incredible motivator and can push people to achieve incredible things.
Yeah.
But it is almost in spite of some of the downsides around that. Like the work ethic piece, the attention to detail, fantastic. But the criticism and self-doubt and self-talk and the pressure that it creates to are counterproductive. So harnessing and managing that in an effective way. But it is amazing how often, I'm sure a lot of the people we work with in a non-sport context have been incredibly successful in life. That is a common trait among high performance that can be really, really challenging.
Really common. And I found some of the work that I do, again, it's Dr. Keith Witt, who's been on the show a couple of times. He's an integral psychology practitioner, and 75,000 hours of therapy sessions. So he's seen a few reps himself. And we've talked over the years a lot about changing motivation systems, where the never good enough motivation system gets you so far. But, we talked earlier about sustainability. I think it where I started to peak and burn out was never good enough. There has to be a point where you embrace being an expert, you embrace not knowing everything, and that you're trying to get better. Like, it is good enough, but I can be better. And take the criticism out of it. And it's a scary leap for a lot of high performers to make. I saw a lot in coaches. I see it a lot now in executives, because they feel like they're going to lose some edge, lose the drive, the thing that got them there. But, I just think it doesn't keep you there.
I think that's one of the things where I think curiosity is such a gift, for people to be able to ask the questions and be curious without this risk, right? And again, I think where fear can be, fear plays an important role in our life and survival. But being a voice and a thought, as opposed to an action and an identity, that's a critical difference, right? And being able to be curious about ourselves to grow, we have choices about, what we do next and what our game plan is, and really understanding and taking power of that.
Yeah. And is that where you suggest people start? We see a lot of overwhelm, and that there's so much noise in high performance, and it's it's every influencer who, has a 4:30 a.m. morning routine, and this is how I got successful. And it's interesting. Most people start that routine after they're successful. They grind and sweat and worry, like everyone else during the process, but then, free up some time. And I've been through it as a entrepreneur now. I get it.
Definitely. I
How
think
do you break through that, and where do people start to get a handle on these overwhelming sensations that they might be experiencing?
it's a great question. And one of the places that I really like to start and explore with people is literally having them spend time to think about defining what is success and what is failure.
Mm.
And I think even, if people are really struggling to articulate some of that, is to share when they've been at their best and when they've been at
Yeah,
their worst, and to
yeah,
deconstruct that a little bit. But often, as we think about those moments where the self-doubt or the negative self-talk and criticism is at its highest, it really comes down to understanding where the fear is coming from,
mm.
and the
Hmm.
irrational beliefs that are supporting and fueling those, which have
Hmm.
often become a very unconscious habit.
Yeah.
But being able to get clarity about actually what is success, and challenging that, that
Hmm.
beyond, we're even going through that exercise in the tennis world about really trying to define success, is define winning every Grand Slam
Yeah.
event in the year,
Yeah.
probably not. Like, I think if
Yeah.
you asked a Federer or, one of the, Serena Williams or the greats, they're, of course they are, their intention is to win every match that they set the foot on the court. But that's not their deep rooted success. And I think
Hmm.
that's where a John Wooden, was so eloquent and powerful in his time as, one of the most successful college basketball coaches of all time. Even spent some time with one of his grandsons, who said they never heard him talk or say the word win and winning.
Wow.
But his definition of success embraced this idea of competing, and
Hmm.
playing to win every time,
Hmm.
which is a very different, controllable
Hmm.
measure. And I think when we can take control over our commitment and our intentions and our focus, we understand your opponent and the conditions have a say in winning a
Right.
match,
Right.
or performance. So, really looking at constructing a definition of success that you have control over, and that can be about discipline and effort and excellence in what you're doing. But, really exploring what that definition of success and failure is can really empower you to never fail.
Yeah.
And think about, in life, if we could go around and know we couldn't fail, like how
Hmm.
empowering and positive an impact that has.
I really like that framing because, and what came to mind was at the Leafs, how Mike Babcock would lay out the season was in, I think it was 5 game segments. And he would just say, okay, we need, let's say, 6 points per 5 game segment. So that's 3 wins in the
Yeah.
NHL. So we didn't live and die by every single game.
Hmm.
We were never happy if we lost a game, but it gave us an opportunity to reflect and have a successful segment. And the way he came up with that was he thought, okay, for us to make the playoffs, we need 80 points for the season. So that's how that breaks down.
Yeah.
And so we knew if we were behind pace or if we were ahead of pace. And we always tried to win each game. We always prepared well for each game. But it was a little less pressure, and it made us a lot less reactive. He and I would sit down and as soon as the schedule was released, and we would plan every single practice. If we were traveling, if we were staying home, if we were staying over, we would plan the time of the practice to optimize for sleep. And because we had that broader view, it meant that didn't change if we won or lost.
Mm.
Right? We didn't have to be landing, we lost, everybody's mad. No, we're practicing tomorrow. The guys don't get their day off.
Hmm.
Right? And other teams I've been with, it was up and down with every win or loss.
Yeah.
So I think that's such a great way to frame things. It is by that. Okay, what does that big picture of success look like? Like, what's the goal? And understand that perfection isn't necessarily what we need.
And you hear it all the time in sports, right? With trust the process, but really fundamentally, that's what it comes down to, right? And having a coach that you're working with, and that great example of stepping out there to win every time, but you're trusting the process, right? That you're not changing the calendar or the schedule completely because of a loss that may have had more to do with a bad call, an opponent
Right.
performing above expectation, a lot of conditions or situations out of your control. You might have actually played great, and on another night you might play worse and win. But does
Mm-hmm.
that mean that we should change things?
Right.
So, yeah, being able to level set going in, knowing what you're committing to and what you're judging your performance on, um, really gives you a much more sustainable, higher performance. And I think that's ultimately what a lot of the best performers do, is take that level of objectivity. And even in our sports industry, one of the things that I noticed that the scouts and coaches really liked about young players is accurate self-awareness, the ability to
Mm.
self-reflect in an objective and removed way, which I think is an interesting thing for them to value, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we see the player who's upset, pissed off when they lose, and over the moon when they win, but you don't necessarily want to see those massive ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And so having that thoughtfulness behind it is really helpful.
That self-awareness piece is a really interesting one, huh? I think it's a very difficult one. Again, I'll use one of Keith's things. You can't tickle yourself, right? He's like, that's why you need a coach, because often you can't see some of your blind spots, and your blind spots could be your positives as well as what you perceive as your negatives. And I think it's a very deliberate trait to build. Again, like I see it in coaches who demand that the players keep a cool head, don't make stupid decisions, don't get emotional, whilst screaming at the players on the sideline or throwing cups of coffee in the locker room. It's the cognitive dissonance. I think within this self-awareness realm can be quite stark.
You're dead right. It's not something we talk about enough, probably, as far as
Hmm.
being a difference maker. But I think you're right. We all have blind spots. So perhaps the challenge or the question is, what are you doing to expose your blind spots and get something out of that? Not just to
Hmm.
embarrass yourself or be
Right.
uncomfortable. Like that's not fun.
Right.
So what's the purpose behind that? And to your point, like talking about coaching again, something that I think was really challenging and potentially threatening to a lot of coaches we worked with was even putting a microphone or camera on them.
Right. Right.
But done with some of that safety net of
Hmm.
just self improvement, and it's not a
Yeah.
criticism or critique, but just looking at the good and the areas of improvement, and what meaning does it have for them, and what opportunities are there. Even just talking to a coach recently in the realm of tennis, where AI presents a new opportunity around, uploading the audio from that video and getting a summary, getting a script
Right.
of that, and being able to look at how does that match what you thought it was, and
Hmm.
what are the pros and cons? How did it come across? What could be done differently? What are
Hmm.
opportunities out there? So there's a mine of information, but I think it's a barrier for a lot of people that don't want to know.
Yeah.
And why is that? But like, what can we do that's going to potentially help us? And self
Hmm.
awareness, I think, is such an underrated tool.
Yeah, I think the environment has to be right. Number one, if I think about head coaches, for them to be vulnerable And for them to be under the microscope, that's quite a threatening place to be when you could lose your job within 3-4 games if you're on a losing streak. I think if you're in organizational culture, and this is inside or outside of sport,
100%.
you might have the self-awareness, but you might never have the level of comfort where you could actually express your weaknesses, because
I think
they'll easily be capitalized on.
it has to be for you, right? Like not for a GM or your boss or checking the box because you got to do it for work. Like, it really has to come from you and for you,
Right.
which is again one of the gifts of technology and access that we have right now. Like no one needs to know, like
Right.
how we have the ability to film ourselves or
Right.
or even just asking questions, right? Of or reflecting with the person that you're working with, if that's appropriate. I think that there are so many different ways that we can do it where there is more safety, and maybe working yourself um, up to different kinds of performances and just, test yourself and see what that's like, what you get out of it, and be creative. But how do you get feedback? Like we said, it's easy if you're being filmed and you're on TV, then very easy to get feedback. It might
Right.
be, you might not have thought about how do I get feedback in a boardroom, or
Right.
what kind of opportunities are there, in your environment that might be accessible and provide some of that.
I just think that would be such a valuable tool. I think like coach development seems to be much more prevalent outside of the United States. And I think there are executive coaching programs available more and more, but they tend to be where you get sent when you're underperforming. We had Cody Royal on last week, and that was something that he highlighted. One of the challenges he faces is that coaching is generally something for underperformers. And so there's a bit of a stigma there. But as a tool to optimize and enhance and really perform at your peak, I just think that would be invaluable to have in a boardroom.
Oh,
What's
absolutely.
your sentiment analysis on your speech?
Yeah, and I love Cody's work, and again another Toronto guy that I know
Yeah.
we got to know a long time ago, and doing great work. And I think it's awesome to see the rise in executive coaching and coaching, now compared to 10 years ago. And you're right. I think a lot of countries like in Australia and New Zealand or places like that have very small population but have way overperformed. Compared to other industries or populations. And I think that's something North America has struggled with because there's so many people. It's been much more evaluation based than it has developmental. And I think bringing more of a developmental mindset to sport, but also just generally speaking too, is huge. And one of my old mentors used to always say, you don't have to be sick to get better.
Yeah.
And I think that principle of what are you doing to grow and evolve, is such a different and important lens on how we get better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that helps. So I'd like to touch on pressure now that obviously it's so apparent in professional sport. And there's a couple of different angles I want to go here, but I think that directly helps high performers deal with pressure. It is going through that evaluation and an improvement process and having that curiosity. But pressure isn't only in sport. That I think there is pressure in every facet of every human's life that they're going to step into an arena that it is relatively high stakes in their life. How do you work with athletes to deal with pressure in that regard?
Great question. I love the Billie Jean King quote about pressure as a privilege. And I think similar to that, what is success, what is failure lens at the very beginning, it's really critical because when it's a choice, it changes the commitment, right? Like when pressure is just put upon you, like most people might resent that or resist that.
Yeah.
But there's a great research around that concept of threat versus challenge, and when we can see, a task or something ahead of us as a challenge, that physiologically and mentally we are better suited to perform at our best. When we see it as a threat, physically and mentally and performance-wise, we're not going to be in a position for success. But I think that lens of approaching, this is a really tough moment and it's what I've worked hard to be able to do, changes your approach. You mentioned kind of that, like the man in the arena or poem of like the courage of stepping into the arena, like that commitment and that bold action to step into those pressure moments, to me, is a success, right? Like no matter what happens, on the battlefield at the end of it, like stepping in and committing to being your full self for that moment, is one of the best ways you can set yourself up for pressure moments. But then when we look back at preparing yourself, I think that's the next layer of challenge, right? Is what are the tools and skills you're building to be ready for those moments? And one of the best strategies that I think allows you to scaffold mini interventions, that you turn on the TV at any time and performance, and you can see pre-performance routines all over the place. Whether it's the tennis player who is taking that time between points to compose themselves and keep their focus and lock back in. The golfer, as they're approaching their next shot, and the routines and things that they're doing and saying to themselves before each shot. The soccer player who's stepping up to take the free kick or the penalty. Like, we're not focusing for hours on end. We actually have these bursts of performance and thinking. So again, people see these big moments. What they don't see is the tens of thousands of repetitions a player has done before, not just performing the act, but also in how they're mentally letting go of the past moment, locking in on what they want to do, and then letting their mind switch off and their body switch on. That trust moment of trust before the actual execution. So I think the approach and then the preparation, building those skills to be ready for those moments, are really what separate, champions from the rest.
Yeah, I don't think you could speak to any basketball player on the planet and not hear that breath work is important, right? Yeah. How many times have you watched someone step up to take a free throw? And I don't think I've ever seen somebody step up and not take 3-4 deep, slow breaths to compose before they actually take that shot. So I think what I like about that is the sort of the preparation for the moment. But then I'd love for you to walk us through some of that in the moment presentation, because all the preparation in the world, I get it talking, right? I do a lot of speaking, and you prepare your speech and you've got it down and you're ready. Before you walk through those doors, you're always nervous, right? There's always the thing. So what would one of those routines look like?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that I really think is a powerful tool and I'd like to work with performance on is this idea of producing a script, right? And what I call mental rehearsal. It's this idea of the presentation, right? It's, and it's not to be some utter fantasy land, just seeing highlights in your mind. But I think that moment of stepping into the arena is a really big one, right? And so when I work on a script with somebody, it might be acknowledging that moment, right? It's like acknowledging the moment's arrived and acknowledging opening the door or stepping across that threshold or standing up or whatever that action is, that moment, but embracing it as an opportunity, embracing it as a challenge, seeing it as a positive moment with a breath, with that giving yourself that repetition and that linking the thought with an action of the deep breath. The basketball free throw is a great example, right? Of, you watch that same player at the beginning of a game or an end of the game, and more than likely you're going to see exactly the same actions. Exactly, if you would put a stopwatch on it, the same length of time, the same number of breaths. And that's because it's become a habit. The thing is, you want to take control of that habit. What do you want that to be? What is that action or a cue that is helping you bring to your happy place, to use a Happy Gilmore moment there. But something that's calming, energizing, focused, and combined with what are the thoughts you want to have in that moment, and typically it's going to be quiet. And, that's going to be personal for whatever that person wants to experience. But having the control of creating your script for what you want that moment to be like, I think is a great value add that people will often let the moment come to them. We're actually thinking about what you want that moment to be like and setting the foundation that you can adapt to. We can't predict every moment, although presentations are an easier thing to be able to predict. But I similarly, like in my own life, I remember one of the first times I really used this tool was actually during my doctoral defense exams. And I couldn't anticipate. The whole purpose of those exams were to keep you on your feet and just see how you respond. But it was an amazing moment as I sat there with 5 professors in front of me. I smiled to myself because holy shit, I've actually seen this and done these reps. And it gave me that confidence, and it gave me that calm, focus that was perfect for that moment. I was prepared with the reading, but what I, was anticipating was this really intense grilling from these academic professors. But that mental rehearsal meant that my mind and body were present in the moment, and that I had this positive experience ready for that. And that was thanks to these kind of mental reps, scripting out, having seen the professors in front of me hundreds of times before I was actually doing it, allowed me to quieten those voices and say, yes, I've seen this, I've done this before, let's go.
Yeah. And I think some of those lessons then, would apply to this other kind of pressure that I want us to talk about. And that's sort of the pressure that you didn't invite, right? And I see it a ton. And I want to talk about your experience with young female athletes. Coming out of sport, the pressure on women to look a certain way, act a certain way, which is often completely counter to their performance goals. So outside of sport, maybe it's longevity, it's bone health, it's muscle mass, all these things that are going to keep them alive longer are directly counter to what society says that they should look like, right? Eat and train to be thin. And that same pressure is applied to female athletes. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with young female athletes and how that can apply into this world outside of sport where women are just inundated with these messages.
It's a great question. And obviously the last 10 years in the NHL and Major League Baseball, I haven't had nearly as much exposure.
Yeah.
But certainly IMG Academy and the world of tennis, that's a real, very real and, piece of the environment. And I think, I think a couple of things. One is that coming back to this idea of success and failure or clarity about what is your objective, and not being influenced about what those outcomes are, by other parties, being really clear in yourself about what is it that you're trying to achieve. And usually it's helpful to challenge that for yourself, just making sure and testing, pressure testing, what am I really here to achieve? What is my goal?
Right.
That's important, because if it is that to get approval by somebody else, or winning, or some kind of objective that you don't have control over, you're probably setting yourself up for failure from the very beginning. And so it's really important to be thoughtful about, what is that? And then how much of that do you control? Which obviously, and especially I think some female sports with, if I think gymnastics or things where there are even judges or components on that's a really tough one, right? Where you are literally trying to get approval of judges and humans on the other end of that.
Right.
But I think subtly we can create those challenges for ourselves if it's our coach, and that's obviously doesn't just apply to females, but anybody. If we're looking for others' approval, again, we are setting ourselves up for failure. But I think that the other part of this is noise, right? You mentioned it earlier, and how we, whether we want it or not, there's recently been quite a lot of publicity around social media and the negative influence on mental health that's had for a lot of tennis players who've spoken out about that recently, but also Olympics, and how much of that we allow, in our life, or we don't give boundaries to it. Where not saying no social media, which is probably the optimal, but like, how do we engage with it? What role does it play for us? And how often do we feed ourselves with content? And when do we do that? You talk about sleep, we spending our last hour at night, scrolling, and then creating anxiety, or, a lot of thoughts that spiral as we continue to scroll. You're not setting yourself up for success with that. And that's something you have control over. So creating some boundaries around those things are really important, and understanding how that affects and influences you. But we are in an era where social media, companies are, and obviously cell phone companies, others are designing for addiction, or for addictive behavior too. And so countering that, and understanding that's the goal that a lot of these companies have, and attacking your habits and health. What can you do preemptively on your side to create boundaries and better habits around it?
That's something that Michelle and I talk about endlessly now that we're entrepreneurs and having to do our own marketing, right? And so you're engaging on social media, but it pulls you in. As somebody with ADHD, I find that this is now probably my biggest challenge. I get sucked in to that hole so quick. It's unbelievable. And so I've had to set up physical boundaries, where I have devices that actually lock my phone. Basically, they lock the apps that I don't want. And it's not your screen timer that you can just click, skip this for now. And I've got to physically go and tap my phone on a device to unlock my phone. And I think it's so important to create those boundaries, because I think social media sets standards for us that are just so fake. The couple who do nothing but fight, and they're miserable in their life. But if you only knew their social media, oh my God, you just feel like your marriage was worthless. And same as an entrepreneur, I see all these. I see the morning routines and the discipline and all this stuff that's portrayed on social media. And it's very, very challenging not to judge yourself against those standards. So I think that it's such a great point to just work on your habits and really discipline yourself around them.
And I think that, I read somewhere that, the average person has their cell phone within a 2-foot radius, 24 hours a day. And I think that, and I can relate to that. Like, there's not many moments I have in the day where it's not accessible. And so, even just setting up a do not disturb function on your phone, so it's not buzzing in your pocket, or you're getting the phantom buzz, right? Or when I come home to my kids, I try to put my phone, on the side on the charger, for example, till after dinner, or, just finding hacks and things that work for you, so that you are, and we talked about the power of self-awareness earlier. It is an interesting thing when we can actually look at how much time we are spending online, and often it's a pretty horrifying number, right? So when you can put it into, the number of waking hours you have and how much of that you're online. And I do think the ability to be present, is such a key skill in being a high performer. We are losing, the skill of doing that, because I hate to use this example, but I will, like going into a bathroom and seeing, somebody at a urinal who is also, on their phone. It's like, or somebody who's taking forever in a bathroom stall, and it's because they're scrolling on their phones, right? There's no moment in the day where people are happy to be just with their own thoughts and in the present. We're constantly seeking, that dopamine hit and that distraction, and that makes us poorer performers as a result. And I think that's everyone's susceptible to that. So, what are you going to do about it? is the key question.
I think a deliberate action is so critical, and it's amazing the conditioning. I'm ashamed to admit this, but Michelle and I were sat watching TV, and we're sitting there watching TV, watching a show together, a weekend or something. And the guy on the screen, his phone buzzed, and I picked up my phone. Right. And it just didn't even think about it. Phone buzzed. I picked up my phone, started scrolling. It's just, Michelle was like, do you know what just happened? I was like, oh my God.
But I thought you were going to say you were watching a show on your phone and on the TV. And I was like,
I've done that before. Yeah.
That's pretty commonplace too, right? Like we're attention junkies. And I think when you're talking about performance, it's all about attention. So, how are we training our attention? And that's, we're letting ourselves get so distracted days. It's you are not alone on that, my friend.
Well, Angus, I just appreciate your time so much today. We're coming up on time here. And so I'd really like to give the audience 3 takeaways. What are your top 3 things that people can dive into today that aren't going to take, a ton of time, effort, and investment, but they can start thinking right away?
Great question. I really appreciate the conversation and talking about this. I'm definitely passionate about it. I think we touched on one of the first things, which is just awareness, right? It's just the act of reflecting, and even really concrete question around what is your performance, and when is it good and when is it not, and kind of deconstructing and understanding those pieces. I think that's huge. We haven't mentioned it yet today, but something that I've found really helpful, even in the language and the teams that I work with, is around looking at your day as a routine, how you prepare, how you go about your work or compete, and then how you recover. And, you can have game days, you might have non-game days, just like an athlete. But I think it's great to really understand more about, what do you do to prepare, and how are you recovering? I would say a lot of people in the sport industry do a great job in preparation, maybe not such a great job in recovery. Understanding those modalities, interventions, things could be different for different people. Even something like the act of going for a walk, or quiet time, or whatever that looks like for you. There are so many different options, and you can get to construct that. And I think that's a really powerful act of looking at what your ideal routines are. And then finally, I think, another one we touched on that is really high leverage is really being more concrete and clear about goals. What are you trying to achieve? And like we gave the example with the, with female or male, honestly, like, are you trying to get somebody's approval, or like, you're trying to win? Like, well, what is that? And is that something that you have control over? That you can achieve, that you're striving for excellence, but that you can control every time that you step into your arena, whatever that is. But yeah, I think that self-awareness, how you're constructing, looking at routines, and then you're being really thoughtful about the goals and setting yourself up for success. Those are the three.
I really love the foundation of self-awareness. I really do. Awareness regulates. If we know we have a blind spot, or we know we have something that we need to work on, it's very hard in the long term not to work on it. So I just think those are so great. And you mentioned a moment ago, Angus, training attention. And I think that comes into the awareness piece and the performance piece. Can you give us something that people can do, an example of a way that an athlete might train their attention?
Well, I think there's a million mindfulness practices that you can find online or many places. And I think that's, in a lot of respects, being aware of attention and letting distractions and moments pass and bringing yourself back to a present moment.
Right.
At its core. And I think that's a really powerful way of training attention, because, again, it's this relationship between awareness and stillness that I think is really powerful. And so much of performance is about that moment. It's about being present and understanding when your attention drifts and bringing yourself back. And for some people, that's super hard. ADHD would be an example of that, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you can't make progress, right? Or that you can't utilize awareness about where your attention is and bringing it back to a grounding point or moment. And I think that's a really powerful, way to do that. And it can be as simple as walking the dog, or washing up, or just very human, normal, everyday moments that we, can take for granted or not realize are moments that we can practice our attention, and not just always circumvent to the phone, right? Which, like the bathroom example, it's amazing that people don't even take moments in the bathroom anymore. There are opportunities to get on your phone again.
Those high risk scrolling at the urinal.
Yes, that's the thing.
Well, Angus, thank you again so much. Where can people find you?
Good question. LinkedIn is always a good spot these days. I feel like that's the new business card is LinkedIn or Instagram as well. But I tend to not do as much social media stuff as the past. But LinkedIn's a great place to start.
Great. Well, we'll link to your LinkedIn profile and make sure everyone can find you there. Angus, thanks again, mate. Really appreciate having you on.
Take care. Thanks so much, Jess. Appreciate it.
What a fascinating conversation with Dr. Angus Mugford on leadership, reflection, and sustainable high performance. He left us with 3 powerful takeaways: simple, practical, and high leverage. Number 1, start with awareness. Take time to reflect. Understand when your performance is good and when it's not, and what's driving the difference. Number 2, think in routines. Look at how you prepare, how you perform, and how you recover, just like an athlete would. Structure your day with that rhythm in mind. Number 3, get clear on your goals. What are you actually trying to achieve? And is it something that you can control? That clarity changes everything. At Vitality Collective, we help high performers build systems around exactly these kinds of ideas, so that you can lead with intention, recover fully, and stay at your best for the long haul. If that sounds like something worth building into your life, visit www.vitality-collective.com to learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.